Hello, welcome everyone. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Thank you for joining us. I see people are joining now. And so we'll give everyone some time to just come in into the webinar and then we'll get started. Hello, everyone who just joined us. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Welcome. Would love to hear where everyone's from. If you guys want to put that in the chat, where are you guys checking in from? And I should say good morning too. Some of you are checking in from the West Coast. Good morning and good afternoon. All right, I see Florida, Colorado, we got Pennsylvania, California. Welcome everyone from all corners of the country. Thanks for joining us. So we're gonna get started. Welcome to today's webinar, Seizing the Opportunities in the 2021 NOFO, not NOFO. We were so used to calling it NOFO. We gotta get used to this new and exciting way to look at the NOFO, which is the NOFO. So welcome everyone. My name is Tashmia Bryant. I'm a Senior Technical Assistant Specialist with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. On the next slide, you'll see that I am joined by my colleagues, Kay Mosier-McDivitt and Steve Berg, also from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Also in the chat, we have Christy Schellenberg, who will be helping us answer some questions, having conversation with you all. We'll all be, in the chat having an active discussion. Speaking of the chat, on the next slide. This is our agenda for today. This is what we want you guys to be talking about, what we're going to be talking about today, which is starting off with Steve Berg, talking about the NOFO, what a great opportunity this is, and being able to align this opportunity with other resources that you all are working with. Kay is going to then jump in and talk about how to be strategic to improve your system response, and also getting the community involved and using this opportunity to really end homelessness. Especially, we're going to focus on unsheltered homelessness for a bit, and then we'll do a quick little wrap up. So just to get into some housekeeping, of course, the Alliance is not HUD, so we will not be answering any technical questions like that today. We advise you to please send your technical questions about the NOFO the NOFO. See, I'm still getting into the groove of it, y'all. But technical questions about the NOFO to cocnofo@hud.gov, that email that you see right there on the screen. We also provided some links to you all to some resources that HUD has provided. So you all can click those links, which I'll be putting in the chat as well, where you can learn more about the NOFO. The first link you guys see there is the COC navigational guide, which has information about accessing eSnaps, completing the COC consolidated application, and also submitting it. The second link that you guys see there is the COC program competition webpage. So you'll get lots of information about program registration, grant inventory worksheets, FAQs, project application detailed instruction, and navigational guides. The Alliance also has a webpage that we put together, and there are plenty of resources on there, blog posts, you name it. And so we will definitely make sure that you guys are getting the information you need from all different web pages and resources that are out there. Yes, this recording, these slides will be available to you all after the webinar. So I already saw that question in there. Yes, you will have access to all of this after the webinar. Just a reminder as well that all attendees, you all are muted, but we really encourage you to utilize the chat box. Feel free to share information, ideas. What are you working on? What's going on in your community? How you guys are thinking about this? You guys can ask questions to us, to each other, and also just have some dialogue with your fellow colleagues who are working to end homelessness. Next slide. And yes, like we must start with, we know everyone is exhausted. This has been a trying year and a half, and now we have the NOFO. So we completely understand that. And this webinar is really to help you all just prepare for what you guys are up against in terms of the NOFO. How can you increase your capacity of your COC, of your community? How can you move things forward in terms of the goals and aspirations that you guys have? And ultimately with in mind to end homelessness. This will hopefully be a resource to help you guys think about the NOFO in a way that's going to improve your system. And again, with the ultimate goal of ending homelessness, moving that needle forward. So now I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Steve Berg, who is going to talk about what a great opportunity this NOFO presents. Next slide, please. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Mia, and thank you to Kay and Christy, also a part of our fantastic capacity building team. I am honored to be sharing the podium here with them. We want to get started with the idea of opportunity. The NOFO has changed. Opportunity is actually what the second O stands for. And I don't think that's a coincidence. At first I thought, why are they changing it? But I think it really brings to the fore the idea that this is an opportunity to make a big difference in our communities for years ahead in what happens with homelessness. We are hoping that what will come out of this webinar is the idea of using the NOFO to bring your community's attention to the possibility of drastically improving the number of homeless people in your community. We find that many places, we generally find that many places, the old NOFA was a very effective way, the idea that you're going to be competing to keep your existing homelessness resources and to get new resources is an effective way to open doors, to bring people together, to get people interested who maybe wouldn't normally be that interested in homelessness. This year, it's particularly important because of the huge number of resources on the table. Next slide, please. So the NOFO itself, this year's continuum of care application includes a bump. In most of the last several years, we've gotten a little bump from Congress in funding for this program, but for this year, it was a little bigger than it has been. And so I'm thinking that this NOFO will actually produce a net increase in the capacity of the homeless system that's larger than the increases in previous years. So that's one opportunity, but that is a small amount of money compared with the billions of resources that have been put on the table by Congress in a number of waves of emergency funding since the coronavirus began. The people familiar with the ESG coronavirus funding that's really designed to help make the homeless system more responsive. We have emergency rental assistance that is designed to prevent homelessness, but also to help homeless people get back into housing. Emergency housing vouchers are a set of vouchers that HUD has put out specifically with the idea of addressing homelessness and requiring public housing authorities to enter into a memorandum of understanding with their continuums of care. You've all been involved in that. The homeless home money, as we call it, and then outside of sort of housing and homelessness resources, there's more money for healthcare for the homeless. Medicaid has been expanded. There are other health and services resources. So that money is already on the table. Hopefully people on this call are already involved in community conversations about how to use that to have an impact on homelessness. And there is more on the way. As people might know, Congress is right now working very hard in their committees to figure out what should be in the next budget reconciliation bill. And they're talking about more billions for housing vouchers, more for medical care, for services, for in-home supportive services, for Medicaid. So we don't know what's going to happen with that bill, but we think it's probably going to pass, and there's probably going to be good stuff in it. So there's more resources on the way. We view this NOFA as a context for bringing people in the community together to make big changes around homelessness by bringing those resources, many of which are under the control of different government entities or different private entities and not under the control of the continuum of care. We're hoping this NOFA can be an opportunity for people to do that in your communities. Okay, next slide, please. So HUD has set out particular policy priorities in the NOFO, as they always do. Some of them are ones that everyone is familiar with from past years: ending homelessness for all populations, improving system performance. That's always a priority. I think this year it's going to be more important, as will be explained in a couple minutes. It's got some new priorities, more about partnerships. Again, because of mainly the partnerships are about getting the people who are in control of a lot of these billions of other resources, getting into a conversation with you, with the continuum of care, about how to have a big impact on homelessness. Back to the next slide, please. Okay, that's what the partnerships are all about. Addressing unsheltered homelessness. People know that there's been a lot of news coverage in the last year about unsheltered homelessness, and it's driving a lot of the public attention to the issue, and it's also driving the priority in Congress to make these new resources available. Advancing racial equity is something we've been working on for a long time at the Alliance and in the homeless assistance field, and we believe this is an opportunity to bring that to another level. Elevating the voices of those with lived experience. Again, that's something we've tried to do in the homeless world for many years, and I think this is a year when we're going to be able to make more progress on that. And then, it's back, the housing first approach. I think most of the people who would come on a presentation like this from us probably has been doing the housing first approach the whole time, so that's good. But it's definitely back as a policy priority in the NOFO. So with that being said, by way of introduction, let me turn it over to talk about being strategic to Kay Mosher-McDivitt, and she'll take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So, hi, everybody. I'm super excited to have you here, and just want to follow up with the introductions and what Steve said is that, we are not HUD. We're not here to talk about technical stuff. What we wanted to do today was just help you sort of take that step back and really think about what is it that this NOFO, what direction is this leading us in, and how do we take this opportunity I'm going to just say this, that I know, by the way, I just want to say, if you were part of the group that could not access the HUD webinar last week, we couldn't either. So we have no idea what they said in the HUD webinar, because we haven't been able to actually see that and review the kinds of things that they shared. But we assume that was mostly technical. But what our goal is really to think about that this is the NOFO. It used to be the NOFO, right? Which is a notice of funding availability, which was sort of this idea, oh, there's this money out here and just go get it. And somebody said, I heard somebody say, why the NOFO? Well, it's opportunity. And, an opportunity is something that it's an opportunity. You have to work for opportunities. It's not just having it available, it's an opportunity. So really wanting you guys to really think about using this opportunity. So when you look at the NOFO, this is more than your score. This is more than getting the most points. Obviously, that brings funding in, but we want you to really think strategically about what is in this NOFO, what is in the priorities, what is the kind of things that we need to be doing to really improve our systemic response. Super important. All right, so one of the things that is really important, and in some ways I wish we had actually, we didn't know when the NOFO was going to drop either. We also didn't know it was going to be a NOFO. But we, in some ways, maybe we could have been talking about this because now it's been out for 3 weeks and you guys are in the middle of really, doing this and starting to work on this. But preparation, even if you need to slow down or step back, there's some really what we think are really important things in preparation. So the very first thing is review your 2019 continuing care application. Look at your application. What is it that you said? And then look at your score, right? Look at the score debrief. And, what is it that you said you were going to do? What were the activities that we said we were going to do? What did we say we were going to accomplish? Often we use this as an opportunity, we look at a question and we go, oh, this is something we need to do. And I know when I was writing, my continuing care applications, there were times that I forget to look back. And then here it was the next time, and we really hadn't done something in the community that we said we were going to do. So really be strategic about looking at what is it that you said you were going to do, and then get information from your stakeholders, gather your data so you can respond. Now, it was a pandemic, right? And so we know that a lot of stuff that we wanted to do, we probably didn't get done in the last 18 months. But talk about that. And I know you have only so many words. I've done this, so I get it. But be really strategic and making sure that it's clear to the reviewers and that in your NOFA is that you aren't just writing something to get the money. You really are wanting to use this opportunity to move your system forward. And then look at, where didn't you do well in points? What were things that you were missing? And then really think about what is it that we need to do better in our community to strengthen this area. And then also, if it comes to your funding sources, if you didn't get any rapid rehousing dollars, one of the things you want to look at is we need to add rapid rehousing programs on, because if you didn't get any of your rapid rehousing points, it's really important to really look at, what is the balance we have, in what we're asking for, and what do our bed balances look like, and start really thinking. So when you choose what you're going to fund, really look at how do we prioritize and address the areas with our projects that we didn't do well on in the past. Next startup preparation is then plan, right? Really develop a plan. Make sure that it's a really well thought through plan. Don't just start writing the application in a vacuum. Make sure that everything you're doing is aligned with what your system wants to do. I sort of said, I don't know if this is right, but I said, sort of think of this as a puzzle. You're putting together a puzzle to end homelessness, right? You've got all these pieces of what you need to do in your community to end homelessness. And the NOFO, what is the piece of the puzzle that the NOFO can fit into to put that puzzle together? How are you going to use this NOFO in what you're going to fund, whether it's reallocation, whether it's, your bonus projects, even if something is eligible, look at that last little bullet that I put there. Just because something is eligible to be funded doesn't mean that's a project that your community needs to end homelessness. Eligibility does not mean that, it's something that we are going to fund if it's not meeting our needs to end homelessness in our community. HUD gives a lot of eligibility of what can be funded, but that doesn't mean it's going to be specific to your community. So really ensure that your request for proposals is not just aligned with HUD priorities, but what you're asking for, what you're saying that we're open for proposals. Be very clear. If you haven't put that out yet, I'm assuming you all have, but at the same time, really be talking the language of what is it that you want to fund that is going to make a difference? Where are your gaps in your program? Steve just talked about all these funding resources. So you've had the opportunity to use other funding to do a lot of stuff. So now where are the gaps? maybe we don't have to fund something we funded in the past because we have it funded another way right now. And so we're going to use this opportunity to look at, this particular strategy. So again, just make sure that you're aligning your proposals, what you are choosing to fund, and when you're doing your tiering and your ranking and even the new proposals, making sure that they're aligning not just with priorities, that's important, but what is it that your community needs to move forward in ending homelessness? And then one of the things we want you to really be doing is starting to really review your renewal projects, and always be considering reallocation. So, again, in my own experience, at one point, and I was, back in the day, I was one of the projects, right? And I sort of went into it like, oh, this is just an automatic thing. I'm just going to be renewed. And it's not a given that just because I've been funded in the past, I'm going to be funded in the future, because our needs change. The system changes from year to year. And we know that there's in some communities that a particular project model maybe has been funded for 20 years, and it just becomes a kind of thing like, yeah, we just include them. Or it's a particular provider that is seen, as a really good provider in the community, or, they have a lot of political clout in the community. So there's this thing, about, well, we got to keep funding them because that's just important for the politics. Just really take some time to be strategic, learn from the past and prepare for the future. Like, look at your projects really carefully. If you have projects that are, really underspending money or not at capacity, start looking at, at least pulling some of that money away, like keeping them at capacity. How can we withdraw that money and have them apply for what they're actually spending and reallocate that? Because if you're not spending your entire amount that, has been allocated to you, and if you're not spending down that money, HUD recaptures it and you're not going to get it back. And HUD, when they review this, our understanding is, again, we're not HUD, but they're looking at that kind of thing. Like, are you using what we gave you? Because why would we give it to you again if you're not using it? So look at recapturing money. Look at projects that didn't meet the performance benchmarks, both at your system level and at the program level. And really start thinking about, if this is not meeting our performance standards, then let's start thinking about reallocating, and if you haven't set performance standards yet across your continuum, start really thinking, and it won't work for this particular NOFO, but start doing that work now so that when you get to this next year, you'll have a better way of doing that. I also want to say, and I don't have this on a slide, but, there's not near as many points. If you're looking at this in points, we've looked to, and we realize there's not near as many points for system measures, right? Like, performance has been huge amounts of points in the last few years. This year, not as much, but the message has been made clear is, when you look through and read it, the message to us is very clear. And that is that we realize this has been a really crappy year, right? And there's been a lot of stuff happening. So we're not going to put as much emphasis on your performance, but with all the resources that have been put out in the community, that by next year, we're going to really expect to see some of that happening. And so, when you start thinking about what you're doing and what you're funding, how are these going to impact those system measures, right? So that's like that fourth bullet down. What projects have significant impact on improving system measures? So really ask these questions. Look at your renewal projects, and we put this almost like a checklist so that you can actually sit down as you're talking about this. I'm not talking about this in your ranking and renewal. I think this needs to happen even before that, right? And you may, obviously it's up to somebody to come in and renew their project, but you may want to have some conversations about your renewal projects if you are looking at the plan to reallocate your money. So really start thinking about that now. And then really, again, look at your performance data. And I think I actually said that, is that, do you have benchmarks for key system performance, right? If you haven't done this, really repeating what I just said, but take this as an opportunity to develop that process to establish the benchmarks so that you can start improving on this next year. Use your data. One of the things that we noticed when it talked about, improving system performance, it really added on the use of data, making sure your data is good, and then using your data. and not just reporting your data, but actually using it to make program changes. If you've ever heard me or any of my colleagues, talk, whether it's in a webinar, we worked in your community, you probably get tired of us saying that, but you should be looking at your data at least on a quarterly basis and saying, what is this data telling us about our programs? What is it telling us about what works? And so in our minds, we would like to think you've been doing that over the past year or 2 years since the 2019 NOFO, and looking at your projects that you currently have funded, and you've been using your data to say, this is not working. We've worked with you for performance improvement. It hasn't happened. And so now we might move forward, but just really start looking at that in all your performance. And then one of the things that I want to say, and that's this fourth bullet, is that you need to really start talking about and looking at what guidance are we also providing when we use our data in addressing racial disparities. We know that data is there. We know you guys have been collecting it. We're hearing from a lot of communities, yes, we know, and we've identified racial disparities, but now you need to take your data and start using it to make changes, and start using your data to see if the changes you're making are working. And if they're not, you come back and you redefine and make more changes. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more coming up. So I wrote a blog, a couple of 2 weeks ago, after the NOFO, the week after the NOFO came out, and I talked about starting with the end in mind. And I think sometimes we start, from the beginning, right? And we just start reading, and then just okay, this is what we did. But what I really and we really want you to think about is, where do we want to be? What do we want the NOFO to do for us? What is our end game? So your end game, and by the way, those of you, again, that have been on previous webinars of ours, or if we worked in your community, these slides should look familiar. And our goal in doing this webinar was to help you think about, how do you take the NOFO and align it with all the things we've been talking about, right? So your end game in any community is that homelessness is rare, it's brief, and it's one time, right? So first of all, people in a housing crisis have access to immediate help, including a safe place to go. And then, that should have come up first, right? So first you want to use equity as the foundation, right? So you want to use equity across your system as your foundation. And then you want to, again, now let me go through these bullets, and ensure that people in a housing crisis have access to immediate help, including a safe place to go, right? You want to make sure that people are not unsheltered. So how are we looking at our unsheltered? And I'll talk a little bit about that again. But as you look at this NOFO, if this should be your end game of homelessness being rare, brief, or one time. So what is it that we need to do with this NOFO to make sure these things are happening? If people are spending long periods of time homeless, how can we change that? What can we use in our projects to make sure that we are really effectively finding ways to reduce the amount of time people spend homeless? And finally, we want to make sure that people exit homelessness quickly. So this is not, back to the bullet before this, that I think sometimes, projects can say, oh, well, people were only, in our project for this long, right? So they were only homeless during this period, but it's not about the time they're in your project, it's about your system. So it's from the time somebody hits your system until they exit to a permanent housing, a solution or option for them, which can look different for so many people, right? But that should be happening quickly. But then also, we want to make sure that there's the follow-up that needs to be there for stability, so people are not cycling right back into the system again. By the way, your system measure all of this. But then you also want to use this application and align it and your funding projects to, first of all, improving your system by reducing inflow into homelessness, right? Where are people coming into homelessness, and really think about that. And while, and that's where, you have opportunities in this for coordinated entry. And what is it that you might need to do to coordinated entry on your coordinated entry side to really look at reducing the inflow into homelessness and helping resources at the front door, right? You can't provide those resources at the front door, but there's lots of funding that can do that. But your coordinated entry can do a lot to make that happen. And, with the staffing and what you do in coordinated entry. And then how are we going going to increase the access to permanent housing, decrease the average length of time that people are homeless, right? And address racial disparities, also decrease returns to homelessness, right? But the NOFO is just one more opportunity to make a significant impact on their performance measures, right? To really have an impact in your community. So start saying, as you do this, is how is this NOFO going to help us meet these system measures? How are we going to use this opportunity and fund strategies and the right strategies that are going to make this happen in our community? So being strategic, if you have listened to any of our webinars, we've recently shared these values in our webinars, particularly when we talked about using your EHV vouchers and also the ERA dollars strategically. But, you know, as we started preparing for this and as we've talked internally at the Alliance, what we said is, you know, these values are the same values we need to use whenever we're looking at whatever opportunities they are for funding. So here's one more funding opportunity. These are the values that we really want every community, because we know that communities that have used these values have started to see, you know, a decrease in homelessness. So they're starting to see their system measures get better. Right. So, you know, it's about reducing the number of people that experience literal homelessness. How's the NOFO going to make that happen for you? What can we do with that? How are we going to use the NOFO and help people with the highest needs? So when we look at our project applications and we look at the providers that are submitting them, is it clear that we're going to make sure that we're helping the folks that have the highest needs in our system? And what are our projects going to do? What is every project? How are they tackling this idea that we're going to really reduce racial disproportionality and disparities? By the way, I can never say that word well. I'm not even going to say it again. It just rolled off my tongue today. So I'm so proud of that I'm not going to repeat it again. But it really is important for you guys to take an opportunity to look at this value and say, in our NOFO, how are we doing this as a larger continuum, but how are the projects we're funding? What is these projects bringing to the table to make that happen? And then creating those solid partnerships, right? So we were saying this, right? These are the values we've been sharing with you guys for the last 3 or 4 months, having no idea what the NOFO was going to say ourselves, you know. And then when we looked at the NOFO and looked at the priorities they put in there, we're going, whoa, like this is aligning with what we've been telling you, right? So you want to create really solid partnerships between your continuum of care, your public housing authorities, other housing providers, healthcare providers, right? And really think about mental health providers. The one I was able to get on in the Q&A, like the last 15 minutes of the Q&A. And at that point, the one thing I heard from HUD is there was a lot of questions being asked around, well, you know, when we talk about healthcare, does that include mental health providers? And absolutely. In fact, you are really encouraged. These partnerships that they're talking about is that you want to get, you know, in writing partnerships with your mental health providers. And then we need to, and we've been saying this with all the funds, but again, you know, looking at which projects are going to have the capacity that, you know, when the announcements come in, that they can turn this around and get this project up and started with urgency. But at the same time, doing it with care and urgency. Sometimes, you know, urgency doesn't mean we don't do it with care, but doing it with care doesn't mean that the process is slowed down. People need help now. People that are currently homeless need to get out of homelessness and get housed now. So how do we make sure that our projects are able to act with that sense of urgency at the same time act with care, and really look for that in your projects? I'm just going to come back and say this again, right? Everything you do, don't treat racial equity as a separate lens. Like, okay, this is going to sit over here. We're going to have a committee over here, and that committee is going to handle racial equity. Racial equity should come up in every committee you have, every conversation you have, every time you're talking to a provider, every application you're looking at, everything you do, you need to use this racial equity lens, because without using this lens, the fact that people of color are disproportionately they're disproportionately, what's the word I'm looking for? Part of our system, right? They are disproportionately homeless in our system. And we've seen this in community after community after community. We need to, if we're going to end homelessness, we can't do it without starting to address that and address those disparities. So now I'm just going to do a couple of things to talk about rank and review. And this is not, again, this is not a tool. We're not going to go through all the scoring points. You can do that. But what we want to talk about is really how do you, and again, this might get you points, right? But this is not just about getting points. This is about being strategic to end homelessness in your community. First of all, making sure those tools that you've used in the past, nobody should be using a tool that they've used in the past, because there are new priorities that we haven't seen in the past. Things have changed from what they did, and we need to make sure we're objective. We see in multitudes of scoring tools. But when we saw this come out, we just said internally is that everybody needs to really throw out your scoring tools and start from square one and really be strategic in your scoring tools. So first of all, really, again, start with the end in mind. I can't say that enough, but here's the criteria considerations. So really, first of all, making sure you use objective criteria, right? So ask your question, right? Does this project clearly reflect the HUD priorities, right? Housing first. This is not a box that you check on your tool, right? Or that you check in an application that people submit, where you might create something. Are you a housing first program? Check. You should be asking any project of describing what Housing First is, sharing their policies and procedures around Housing First, sharing job descriptions that reflect a Housing First approach, whatever it is that is super, super important. We have often been in communities working where we see HUD-funded projects that check the box that they're Housing First, but when we've done, is some analysis and worked with communities that, the projects weren't being performed in a Housing First way. Are these projects addressing racial disparities? What are we really doing about that? Are these projects talking about that? And this also becomes, is this a provider that really has, that represents, the same people that are disproportionately, homeless in our system? Are they, representing different, ethnic groups that are in our system, and making sure that we're reaching out to those providers, right? Are we having, not only as a continuum, but every one of your projects should be talking about the housing and healthcare partnerships they have, right? And also this thing with people with lived experience. This is not a name only, and this is not a checkbox. This needs to be real. Like, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, so let me not go down that avenue too far, but this is more than just a checkbox, right? And then next is, both on the renewal and the new projects, are they going to impact your system measures? You know what those are, but really talk about that. But in addition, are they going to also impact racial disparities in your system? Super important to be thinking about this stuff when you create your ranking tool. Again, objective criteria. This is not a checkbox. It really means having some very objective criteria that you're going to be looking for. Will this project support and improve more than one system performance measures? More points than that, but it's beyond more points than that. Like those system measures that we talk about, like, putting people in housing might be one of them, but they also have to shorten the length of time people are homeless. Like you can't do one without the other. So those two need to go hand in hand, and really looking at those hand in hand with the projects you're supporting, right? And then also, again, which new permanent housing projects are also incorporating non-consumer care funding and housing subsidies into their projects. So this is like, I ran a rapid rehousing program back in the day, right? And like 50% of my funding from my rapid rehousing program came from fundraising, right? It didn't come through any public entity whatsoever. And and less than 20% of my funding came from continuum of care. I actually was able to use some CDBG dollars that were local, in our community, but that's just an example on rapid rehousing where, continuum care monies are not meant to fund your entire project. This is about developing and leveraging partnerships. And then finally, also making sure that we're leveraging that healthcare resource, right, with written commitments. And so this, again, that's that objective stuff. This is not just saying you're going to do stuff, but actually showing that the projects you're funding, if they're permanent housing projects, both renewal ones or your bonus projects, are actually having these partnerships. So I'm just going to say again, before I go into the community partnerships and talk a little bit about that at the end of this webinar, is again, really starting with that end in mind. You know, you can have all the components of your system, but if there's not good system flow, it's not happening. So, you know, system flow is an efficient, coordinated, and equitable process that moves people quickly in your system. They come into our system and they leave as quickly as possible. And what it means is that every project needs to be aligned with each other, and projects cannot be working in silos. And, you know, you need to be thinking about things like, you know, when we are reviewing our rapid rehousing projects, they might be, you know, administered by different providers, but are they functioning in basically the same way? Rapid rehousing should look like rapid rehousing. The model should be the same regardless of the providers, and not a bunch of boutique programs. Your permanent supportive housing projects, again, you know, are they managed in very much the same way, so that when somebody is homeless, you know, they're not like shopping around for the best, you know, option. Like, I don't want that rapid rehousing program, or I don't want to go to that PSH project because I don't like the way they operated. Like, really being strategic about that and looking at your applications from that lens of system flow and being efficient and coordinated. So I know I talk fast, right? So take a breath. So don't do this alone. And again, think about leveraging this, as we cannot be doing this in a vacuum. And we really, really need to involve the community, right? This NOFO is an opportunity to assess your current partnerships. It's an opportunity to like strengthen those that they have, and then work and create new partnerships, right? So it's not only important to think about like who's, you know, involved in your community, but like, you know, icing on the cake, the NOFO is going to reward you if you've got strong, solid partnerships. And why are they rewarding you for that? Not because they just want to give you points, right? It's not about that. They're rewarding you for that because communities that have strong partnerships are making better progress in ending homelessness. So the points go in alignment with making a difference. So, you know, you can write about all of this, but your performance and your homeless numbers and, you know, you're unsheltered, all of that, the progress that you're making is really reflective of also what you're saying. And so the two need to go hand in hand. So I think we all learned, you know, this is not business as usual, right? And if, you know, again, I think I said this at the beginning, and, you know, if your process in your community has been like, okay, you know, we just take our renewals, and as long as they're basically doing what we wanted them to do, we're just going to renew these projects, right? And I've seen, you know, sometimes, and I know I used to do this in my community back when I was a COC lead, is that, you know, our process for new projects and for renewal projects was different. Renewal projects, you know, well, we knew these, you know, projects, but what we weren't standing back and asking the question is this project still meeting this need? Is there something we need more? Can we redefine this? Can we, like, you know, is there something we can do to maybe bring a couple of projects together instead of, you know, having 4 different rapid rehousing programs? Maybe we'd be better with 2. And can we like talk to these providers and maybe, you know, reallocate one project to another one, and start having those conversations, right? Because if we're not seeing changes in our system, if we're not seeing an impact, it's, by the way, I'm going to say this, like, housing out there is like, it's just the biggest challenge ever. It's even more challenging than it's been in the past, right? But in spite of the lack of availability, our low vacancy rates, the cost of housing, I don't care what place in the country we go to and we say, what is the biggest barrier to, you know, ending homelessness? And affordable housing comes up. If you look at the affordable housing map, there's not one place in the country that has affordable housing. And so, you know, we need to, and we are working on that, right? We continue that message. Steve is doing tons of work as well with his policy team on those messages, you know, which is why we're trying to get more housing vouchers and all of those kinds of things out there. However, I want to also say that we are still seeing communities in some of the tightest housing markets we have ever seen that are still making progress, right? Their numbers are, you know, they're at least holding the line. And so, we can continue to talk, and we need to continue to talk about the affordable housing crisis, but we also need to take a look at what we're doing. What are some of the things we've been doing, and maybe try something different, right? So it's not business as usual, right? We've learned a lot of lessons during these last 18 months. And if there's one thing, again, that's become clear, it's just that our world is not business as usual. And I think sometimes we can get so comfortable with our governance, right? We can get so comfortable with the providers we're used to working with, and, and how we do business. But, this is an opportunity to really rethink what we're doing, and look at that. So, the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about building these partners to promote racial equity. And so, I have, and these are some of the things, and one of the things we just noticed that I'm going to say in this NOFA is that there are a lot of places where racial equity is popping up. It's so, just like we said earlier, is that you should look at everything through racial equity lens. The NOFO itself, there are just different questions that we're seeing and different areas throughout the NOFO with points that it's not in one little packaged area. And so really be thinking about this. But first of all, have you identified disparities? We think almost everybody has done that, right? By, and the barriers faced by these populations. But now it's time to stop talking about the disparities and talk about what steps we're taking to address and eliminate those barriers, right? And so first and foremost, you need to build partners that can promote racial equity. Right. So remember, we talked about the, housing, housing and healthcare partners. But I want to say to every community is that you need to start taking time to build the partners to promote racial equity. This means digging below the surface of conversations and make sure that we've got true partnerships that are going to create change and create equitable change, right? So identifying these disparities, is the start of all of this, but really now, like, who are those populations that are overrepresented in our local homeless population? And then, next, like, what are these steps that we're taking? What are these steps we're taking to improve that racial equity? And what are those partnerships that we're building to obtain input and include persons of different races and ethnicities? But you know what? Just having a partnership isn't enough, right? We need to actually, really talk to people and allow others to tell us what we need to do. Even if we've been in this world for a long time working on homelessness, I think we need to take time to really listen. And I talked to a Continuum in the last couple of months. It said, well, how do we increase, this diversity on some of our boards? Well, we just, in our community partners, we just don't have much diversity. And I said, go to where you have diversity in your community, right? Well, yeah, we do. So go into those communities. There's faith-based, congregations. Are those folks that are really, in those communities that really have a presence and understand what's going on in their communities, that really will take the time to become part of our strategy to end homelessness, and really look at those. So, and even when you're announcing new projects, just putting it, on your website, the normal ways that you send out to announce, start digging deeper. How do we make sure that we're getting this information into the communities that are widely represented in our populations, but we may not have worked in the communities where a lot of those representations come from? So really start digging deeper in that. So let's talk a little bit about this governance board then, right? Look around at your governance board. Say that 35% of your people, are of our diverse, racial and ethnic groups, right? And look at your board. If 35% of your board is not diverse, you need to start working at changing that. But it's not just about like having token people at the table. It's really about using people's voices, and really bringing those folks to the table, and also in our providers as well, making sure that we're bringing both new providers to the table, and we're also bringing people and partners to the table to be part of our leadership and part of our governance to change the way we do business. And let me just say, because you're not going to end homelessness, right? We're not going to end homelessness until we address this, right? And then I really want you to talk and think about, how are you rating and ranking based on the degree to which your projects have identified ways to address these racial inequities? Super important, right? Like, Are you requiring projects to actually take steps in what they do to address the racial inequities in their programs and in the people that receive the services? So really think about that. And I've said it before, so I'm going to say it again with people with lived experience, right? This is just not about, again, oh, we have a person, check, right? So, I think, look at this last bullet I have on here. And again, a lot of this comes from things that we saw in the NOFO, but we pulled them out because we think this is the stuff you need to be doing to end homelessness in your community, right? So, are you including voices of people with lived experience in the local planning process? I'm not talking about just when the NOFO comes out. I'm not talking about just being on the rank and review committee, right? Those are things are here, but this is ongoing. Where are those voices? And, and really listening to those voices, not just to have a token person to be there so we can check the mark with, HUD and say, yes, we've done this, but really saying to the folks that we are serving, you have a voice. We're getting ready for our conference that's coming up. And one of the things we said that I'm doing a workshop, and one of the things that one of the presenter said is that for the first time, she said, I don't know why we do this before, but we actually started having focus groups. And we're like, the voice of the consumers is making such a difference in how we provide services. So I want you to really think about that. And again, being really purposeful and using voices of people with lived experience that, are recently homeless, are currently homeless, not having somebody that might be working in a program that's, was homeless 20 years ago. Things have changed, and let's really look at that. The next area is really building and partnering with our healthcare, our housing, and other stakeholders. I talked about this earlier, so I'm not going to go into this, but we put this on a slide so that you can almost use this as a checklist. Again, when you get these slides, you'll see at the very end that there's a website that we'll put on the last slide that actually shows where we're going to be putting these slides in our website, right? But really start looking at, these coordinations, and we actually know that HUD's going to award up to 10 bonus points for continuous care that submit new permanent housing projects that show clear partnerships with both the, housing folks and the healthcare world. And it can be one project. It doesn't have to be two separate projects, but really start thinking about, this checklist of how are we coordinating not only us at the consumer care planning level, but how our projects are coordinating as well. Right. And then also, just, thinking about these stakeholders, this first bullet, I think this is what, let me do it over here because this is where the screen is. I was doing that on my wrong slide, but, and I have it over here on the slide, like, what stakeholders are you partnering with in the community to build equity in your continuum? That is not necessarily something that's specific in this healthcare, and housing partnerships, but this is what you need to be doing to build equity. And these need to be, these kinds of groups you need to have as part of your decision-making process if we're going to end homelessness. And then we can't not talk about a little bit about unsheltered homelessness. Here's some specific things that you're going to be talking about in your NOFO, but it's more than talking about them. I think you really need to be looking at what we're doing and making sure this stuff is happening. How are we making sure that we're preventing criminalization of homelessness, right? And what goals have you established to reduce and end unsheltered homelessness, right? So looking at your numbers and what are our goals, but then what are the steps we're doing? I think too often this unsheltered, we just aren't having this conversations around the actual numbers and being really strategic. And then there's this question that the NOFO has about ensuring street outreach, right? Covers 100% of the geographic area. This is all one of the things in the scoring. But this last little thing that we added is, okay, so you can check those things that, yes, we're covering this and it's a regular basis and we're tailored, but you need to come back and say, what impact is outreach having on reducing unsheltered homelessness? How are we measuring that? So, we can have projects that, okay, we do this, but we have to do this with the eye on, is it having an impact? And really constantly be evaluating what is that impact? So I'm just going to end this by saying, build community, not because the NOFO is telling you to do, but because it's how you end homelessness, right? Don't do it because you're going to score better on the NOFO, right? That's the icing on the cake. But do it because it matters And these partnerships we talked about, communities that have already have these strong partnerships, but are still building them and really thinking strategically about this, right, is the right thing to do, right? If you don't have the right ingredients in the cake, you can have the icing, but you have nothing to put it on, right? And the icing is not going to make it for you, right? So what you need to do is do it because it matters and get those ingredients. And then the icing is that bonus that you're going to get more points when you're actually doing this, and that your system is showing improvement and how it's performing and how those measurements are. This is not business as usual, and we've turned it. And we've learned a lot in the past 18 months. We want to make sure that we don't hit a dead end. So I am going to turn it over to Steve for some wrap-up comments. Steve?
All right, thank you, Kay, for all that great information. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Again, it's all about the opportunity. I think we're looking forward to this NOFO application process as a time when the people who are doing this work, which, I'm so happy to be working on homelessness, largely because of all the great people all around the country who are doing this work, working hard in a very difficult circumstances right now. And I think, I think HUD is looking with this NOFO, I think HUD recognizes the same thing, that of all the people who administer all the different HUD programs, I think there's something special about the people who do the homeless programs. And HUD is looking for help with making sure that all these other resources that are on the table that are supposed to be dealing with homelessness, that are supposed to be dealing with affordable housing, that they'll be used in a way that really works and gets great results. And I think they know that involving people work on homelessness is a way to do that. So that's a big piece of what the continuum of care is all about. And we're looking forward to what communities are going to achieve with this. We know it's an incredible amount of work at a time when there's lots of other work to do, and we admire all of you for all the work you're doing, and we're working to make sure you have the information you need, and that HUD has the right policies, and that Congress puts the money on the table. And I think doing all this together, this is going to be a year we look back on and say we really turned a big corner there, despite everything that was going on. So I'm looking forward to that, and please be in touch. We have a lot of resources available on our blog and on our website that people can use. And so with that, let me say thank you one more time to everybody, and let me turn it back over to Mia for a closeout.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you, Kay, for those helpful remarks and information and just support for the work of ending homelessness, moving the needle forward. Those are some great recommendations that you all gave, and also just framing our thinking about, how communities really should be thinking about this opportunity, because it truly is an opportunity to make a difference and to institute all those best practices that we've been talking about. There's been so much chat, and thank you all for engaging in the chat. There was a lot of conversation about shared housing, about affordable housing, about diversion, so many aspects of ending homelessness. And so this is exactly what you should be thinking about. What are some of the challenges that you all are experiencing? What is the data telling you? What story is it telling you? And using this to shape and inform what your priorities are going to be in alignment with HUD priorities, which should go right hand in hand. This is what you should be thinking about as you're approaching this NOFO process, as you're thinking about rank and review, and thinking about how you can support the work of ending homelessness in your community. Yes, those increasing partnerships, diversifying those partnerships, and also just utilizing your data, qualitative and quantitative, to understand what you need to do to move your work forward. As we said earlier in the webinar, your technical questions can be asked directly to HUD using that COC NOFO email address. I have also provided on this slide a link to HUD webpage resources. There's a navigational guide. There's also FAQs and also the Alliance NOFO webpage. So we will make sure that you guys all have access to this webinar, the chat file, these slides, as well as all of the resources we've been putting out around the NOFO. So all of that can be accessed on the webpage, some great blogs that we produce and more. We'll continue to update that as we go along. So thank you all again for joining us for today. Again, for all of your contributions. Sorry, I'm already clicking on the link. I already have a question for HUD. Just kidding, but just wanted to close out again and just thank you all for being here today, for joining us, for all of your active conversation. And thank you again to Kay and Steve for presenting, and for Christy for all of your wealth of information that you were sharing in the chat. So again, thank you all. Here are our emails if you have additional questions. And again, contact HUD for those additional technical questions. And a link for our webpage is provided below. Thank you all. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.